Thank you, sir. So I didn't come into this today with necessarily any preconceived idea about what I would say or how I would vote. But what I can say is that there's something that makes me very uneasy about this proposition, not so much about the content of it in terms of the subject matter, because I think on a very basic level, if we were to ask to be making a decision about whether we think that anyone in the world should be hunting whales generally, and perhaps in this way, we'd probably say no, and we would probably do that even more so resolutely if we'd just watched some videos about it and how they're killed. The problem is we're being asked to make a decision which I suspect, sir, I may be wrong, in this nature would be setting a precedent. I know that there was a vote about 20 years ago where Deputy Southern brought a proposition to condemn the invasion of Iraq, and I think that was completely different because I think that was a political decision that was being made by the UK government, and as a British island and as an assembly which could make its own decisions, we could send a signal, and the assembly decided it wanted to send a signal to the UK that this assembly didn't believe that the invasion was justified. And of course there would have been lots of ideas around at the time, and the rest is history. What we're being asked to do here is to pass judgment on the practices of another, not fully sovereign necessarily, but another country and another government, in fact. And in reality, it shouldn't be me standing up to say this. It should be our government who should be, I think, opposing this, or at least they should issue some circumspect comments in this regard, because we're told time and time again that it isn't the position of the Jersey government, at least, and probably I think the Assembly might want to take that into consideration about whether we pontificate, if that is indeed what we could be said to be doing today, about what other countries do ethically. You could also argue, why are we singling out the Faroe Islands? Are they the only country that hunt whales? I think the last time I checked, I might be wrong, but Japan also hunts for whales. And they will do that for specific reasons, which might be economic, cultural, whatever. It may well be that we don't agree with whale hunting, but is it our job as an assembly to be saying you shouldn't do that? Now, I'd like to give a couple of examples, maybe a couple are real and one's hypothetical. I've had the opportunity to talk to parliamentarians from other countries, and often that's as a byproduct of going on conferences. I know not everyone agrees with going on conferences for the CPA or for example, with our membership of the APF. I personally think that they're valuable and that they actually provide, on balance, good value for us as parliamentarians, as a learning forum, but also as an interface for exchange of ideas. And you can hear about a practice that happens in a different country, and your immediate reaction is, that sounds bizarre, why do you do that? That doesn't sound right, that doesn't sound fair. How can you justify that? And I'll give two examples. One is when I went on a trip to Samoa. So I'm not going to stand up and say that I'm the only member of this assembly who's been to the Faroe Islands, which I thought was interesting yesterday. I know Deputy Joseph might be at home listening, sir, and he was very quick to say, I'm probably the only member of this assembly who's been to the Faroe Islands. And I thought, yeah, maybe you are. And I said, I'm not an expert on the Faroe Islands. Until recently, I thought that they were actually a group of Egyptian islands rather than necessarily belonging to Denmark. But I did my research, sir, and I found out that they lie somewhere between Scotland, Iceland, and where else? In that northern part in Denmark. But I have been to Samoa, and when I went to Samoa, I found out something interesting. I found out that, and I thought our electoral system was bad. And I found out that the only people who were eligible to stand for election in Samoa were if you were a tribal leader. So it's not that they had people who automatically were elected as parliamentarians if they were constables or tribal leaders. It's that the only people who could actually be members of their parliament were tribal leaders. And the initial reaction is to say, that doesn't sound right, that's not very democratic, how could you do that? And then you start to look at it more and you say, well, actually, their starting point is completely different. They have completely different cultural starting point, perhaps ethics that go behind that, and reasons why they do that. Judicial systems that have worked for them perhaps for hundreds of years, which might be under scrutiny and which will be under scrutiny there. I also had a recent conversation with a Monegasque representative at one of the APF conferences, and when he told me that the only people who can vote in Monaco are the ones with Monegasque nationality, but that's actually few people who have got Monegasque nationality, so that the vast majority of people who perhaps live and work in Monaco have no say at all about the government that they end up with and the rules that they have to live and abide with. But he did explain, and when I said to him, does that sound right to you? He said, well, there's a very specific reason why we have that. And he explained the historical context, the fact that there was a backdrop with the French government, and that there was a specific set of circumstances for that. Now, and at the end of that, I was like, okay, actually, that's maybe fair enough. I still think you might need to tweak your system at some point, but it's not my job to tell you that as an outsider. So thank you for sharing what you've said to me. We could say to the Isle of Man that we don't think the TT races that happen in the Isle of Man are very ethical, because I think somebody dies, quite a few people die every year in the Isle of Man. And I know that's different. I know that they're humans, they're adults, they're consensual, they're consenting. So they make the decisions. The whales in the Faroe Islands don't volunteer themselves up to get slaughtered every year. So there is a distinction there. But as an assembly, we could say, I don't think the Isle of Man should have a TT race every year, and we think that you should stop it. Please convey that message. We want the UK government to tell the Isle of Man that they should stop the TT races. It's very bizarre territory for parliamentarians to be in. And so I like to consider myself an animal lover, and I know Deputy Farnham is probably thinking, I want Deputy Tadier to stop speaking now, because he doesn't sound like he's helping my cause very much. And I do remain here to be convinced, but I can't help feeling that procedurally this is the wrong thing to do. And now Deputy Mezak did raise it yesterday in question time, is that where do we draw the line? Because the government's position has traditionally been that we don't, when it comes to human rights issues, which I'm not going to say are any more or less important than whale rights, but they can't be any less important, right? Can they? I think they've got to at least be given parity, that there's a tradition or a convention that we don't unilaterally condemn another country for its practices. Now, we could easily do that if we wanted to. The Assembly could have a debate now. Instead of about Wales and the Faroe Islands, we could be talking about women's rights issues in Iran, or we could be talking about gay rights issues in Uganda or in Dubai. And we could send a message, because maybe the rationale is that the Faroe Islands are part of a group of islands that come together every few years to participate in the Island Games. In the same way that there are lots of members of the Commonwealth which have probably got completely different practices to what we would see as the norm and against the current political zeitgeist. So we could issue a statement to Uganda saying that we think that your record on gay rights, LGBTQ+, is appalling, and that the current laws that you've brought in are wrong. We could do the same to those countries who have, I think, regressed when it comes to abortion laws and the rights of women to access abortions. And do we do that? Because if we actually support Deputy Farnham's proposition, which is correct at its base level, I'm not going to call it well-intentioned, because I think it's more than that. He's sought an issue which I think he feels very strongly about, and that there are probably multiple issues which the 49 of us here feel strongly about, which we could bring to the Assembly, but I think we have to exercise an element of self-censorship and self-restraint when we do that. Otherwise, we'd have a big list of things that we want to fix about the world, which ultimately people would say, hang on a minute, Deputy Tadier, aren't you elected as a Jersey representative, and more specifically as a St. Brelard representative? And I hate to be religious, but I am sometimes called the secular dean, sir. Admittedly, it's a title that I gave myself, so I'm not sure if that holds any water. But I do have some, we talked about pedigree yesterday. I do have some pedigree, albeit as a lapsed believer now, sir. when it comes to religious upbringing. Be careful what you wish for, maybe. All those years of Sunday school and attending church, I had to take some of it in, didn't I? So when we were at university, I was a member of the Christian Union, and in our house we were all Christians. And we would sometimes tease each other by calling each other plankai. So if somebody was being particularly religious or preachy, or saying, oh, you shouldn't have done that, we would just call them plankai. What does plankai mean? I think Deputy Gorst might know what it means. It comes from Matthew 7, chapter 7, verses 3 to 5. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Because we've got to be careful what we wish for here. We might be standing here condemning the Faroe Islands today for some practice which is probably, quite rightly, probably abhorrent, but we don't know the full facts of it. But they might, and someone else might say, well, actually, we think that the States Assembly is very bizarre. You've got this, no offence, sir, but you've got this unelected official who presides over your assembly. The Commonwealth might say, that's not normal. You need to get your act together, and you need to start to elect your own speaker. And we might say to them, mind your own business. We might say, actually, this system has worked quite well for us for 1,000 years. And there might be a debate to be had about that, but we will have that debate internally. And we will decide what's best for our island, and we'll do that as parliamentarians reflecting the will of the people. They might also say, some people might say, we don't like Jersey, you call it an offshore finance centre, we think you're a tax haven. And we think that being a tax haven is actually very harmful to the world. We've got a completely different social model, an economic model where we come from. So we're going to pass a motion that requires the French government or whoever to condemn Jersey as being a tax haven. What kind of reaction would we have if another parliament did that to us? And so I would question, what kind of reaction will it have in the Faroe Islands if we pass a motion today? And I'm open to be convinced, because of course the counter-argument, which maybe Deputy Farnham will make, is that it will have the effect of them standing up and listening for once and say, actually, you know what, it's probably time that we knock this on the head. In the same way that there's been all those arguments about apartheid and sanctions that happen around the world. So I'm willing to be convinced, but if nothing else, sir, I think it was important to put those thoughts on record, even if I do end up supporting Deputy Farnham's today. It's not something that I can do easily. I'm probably more likely to abstain on this than to vote for it, sir, but I welcome thoughts from other members, sir.
Thank you very much.